The palace walls did not shake with shouting, they froze in silence. And that silence became more terrifying than any royal scandal the public had seen in years. Because according to whispers spreading through royal circles, this was not just another disagreement between the crown and Meghan Markle. This was something colder, more calculated. A moment insiders allegedly described as the beginning of a royal reset after a so-called bombshell sent shockwaves through private palace discussions. Half an hour after a confidential audience reportedly ended, aides were suddenly moving through corridors with stiff faces and lowered voices. Doors closed, meetings shifted, and then came the image everyone noticed: Meghan leaving without her usual confidence while senior staff refused to answer a single question. That one moment ignited weeks of speculation, and suddenly the internet was no longer asking whether tensions existed inside the monarchy. People began asking whether King Charles had quietly reached a breaking point. At first, there was absolutely nothing official, no statement, no denial, no comforting palace briefing leaked through carefully selected reporters. Just silence, dangerous silence, and inside royal commentary circles, that silence started sounding intentional. Observers who monitor every royal movement began spotting tiny details that felt deeply wrong. Meetings were reportedly rescheduled at unusual hours. Advisors were seen entering private offices unexpectedly. Conversations that normally ended with reassurance reportedly ended with closed doors and tension-filled quiet. According to circulating interpretations, the gathering was originally meant to be routine, a discussion connected to future planning and institutional matters. But then additional advisors allegedly entered the room: legal minds, administrative figures, people who usually appear only when something serious is under review. And suddenly, the whispers changed. This was no longer gossip about family drama. The conversation allegedly moved toward titles, obligations, the future image of the monarchy itself. Royal titles are not just decorations. Inside palace logic, they represent continuity, legitimacy, and institutional power. That is why speculation exploded the moment commentators started suggesting that private discussions may have touched on whether titles still aligned with royal expectations. And according to ongoing palace watch chatter, these conversations had supposedly been building quietly for months while public attention remained elsewhere. King Charles was increasingly being portrayed not as an emotional father, but as a monarch under pressure to protect continuity during one of the most unstable modern periods in royal history. Then came the part that pushed the entire story into dangerous territory: whispers about paperwork, internal reviews, historical precedent, administrative consultations. No one could confirm anything, but phrases started repeating everywhere: private concerns, institutional review, legal framework. And once those words entered the conversation, people stopped treating this like celebrity gossip. Suddenly, it sounded like palace machinery had started moving quietly behind closed doors. Royal observers kept repeating one chilling idea: the monarchy rarely reacts quickly, but when it reviews something, it does so silently. And that silence became the biggest clue of all. The public started re-examining everything: old interviews, public appearances, missing moments. Every pause looked meaningful. Every absence looked strategic. And then an uncomfortable possibility emerged. What if the palace was not reacting to one dramatic event, but preparing for something much larger? Because once discussions allegedly touched legitimacy, symbolism, and institutional continuity, this stopped being about headlines and started becoming about survival. Titles inside the monarchy are not treated as personal trophies. They are tied to duty, restraint, and service. That old royal philosophy suddenly collided with modern celebrity culture in the most explosive way possible. For centuries, titles were connected to the crown itself, not personal branding, not public popularity, but continuity. Yet modern media transformed everything. Royal figures became global brands. Visibility became influence. And according to interpretations spreading through commentary circles, palace insiders allegedly feared the line between institutional identity and public celebrity had become dangerously blurred. Supporters of traditional monarchy argued that titles only retain value when they remain connected to service rather than personal ambition. And that was exactly why recent rumors reportedly caused panic behind palace walls. Then came the rumor nobody could fully verify, the so-called Dina bombshell. But what terrified observers was not proof. It was the palace reaction, or rather, the lack of one. Senior figures reportedly refused to engage. No clarification, no emotional denial, just more silence. And in royal culture, silence never stays silent for long. it mutates into suspicion. Online forums exploded. Commentary channels spiraled into endless analysis. Some dismissed the entire thing as another internet fantasy feeding off royal mystery. Others believed the speed of palace caution suggested something deeper was happening privately, and that changed the emotional center of the story completely. The public stopped asking whether the rumor was true. Instead, people started asking whether advisors had already quietly begun reviewing broader questions about reputation, protocol, and institutional resilience. That distinction was terrifying because once speculation enters procedural territory, public imagination explodes. Suddenly, every meeting feels significant. Every neutral statement feels loaded. Every delayed response starts sounding strategic. Commentators debated whether private consultations were happening not to investigate sensational claims, but to protect the monarchy from future instability. The deeper this story went, the less it sounded like a family dispute, and the more it started sounding like the monarchy preparing itself for survival mode. That was the terrifying shift people could not ignore. Because once speculation moved away from emotional drama and into the language of process, protocol, and institutional preservation, the atmosphere changed completely. Suddenly, observers were no longer waiting for emotional confrontations. They were searching for procedural clues, tiny changes in wording, quiet adjustments in appearances, subtle shifts in hierarchy. And according to royal commentary circles, that possibility became more unsettling than any headline itself. Because if private consultations had truly begun, the palace would never announce them dramatically. Institutions like this move slowly, quietly, deliberately. They consult, they review, they document. Then one day, the public suddenly realizes something changed weeks earlier behind closed doors. That ambiguity created unbearable tension. Some commentators argued palace advisors were simply protecting the monarchy from online chaos and refusing to validate rumor culture. Others believed discussions had expanded far beyond media management into broader concerns about presentation, symbolism, and long-term institutional strategy. That distinction mattered because if conversations became procedural rather than emotional, then the entire meaning of the story changed. This was no longer about anger, it was about preservation. Royal analysts repeatedly emphasized that monarchy communicates through structure, not spectacle, through titles, through silence, through ceremonial positioning, through what remains unchanged and what quietly evolves without explanation. And suddenly, every ordinary moment looked suspicious. Every neutral public appearance was analyzed frame by frame. Every palace schedule became a code people were desperate to crack. Commentators began asking strange questions. Would silence preserve stability or deepen public suspicion? Would action look decisive or reactive? Would acknowledging rumors strengthen the crown or accidentally legitimize chaos? Those questions had no easy answers because modern monarchy lives inside permanent investigation. One wrong move can create years of consequences. One emotional reaction can reshape public trust overnight. But then came the most chilling part of all, the growing belief that the palace may never fully explain anything publicly. That possibility terrified observers because people had spent weeks expecting a dramatic royal moment, a statement, a confrontation, a visible ending. Instead, according to interpretations spreading across royal circles, what emerged felt colder and far more unsettling. Controlled language, measured silence, no emotional closure, just the impression that the institution intended to continue forward untouched while public speculation spiraled around it like a storm outside locked gates. And that quietness split public reaction instantly. Some believed the lack of spectacle proved nothing had actually changed behind palace walls. Others argued the exact opposite, that the silence itself suggested calculated restraint. Suddenly, commentators stopped debating personalities and started debating institutional psychology. What does monarchy protect when pressure rises? Reputation? Stability? Legacy? Continuity? According to ongoing public interpretation, one theory became especially powerful, that ancient institutions survive uncertainty not through emotional reaction, but through refusing to behave emotionally at all. That realization changed the emotional center of the entire narrative. What started as explosive gossip surrounding Meghan Markle and a supposed bombshell slowly transformed into something much larger and more uncomfortable, a debate about whether modern monarchy can survive the age of nonstop exposure exposure without sacrificing the mystery that gives it power. Critics argued silence looked manipulative. Supporters argued silence looked disciplined. Traditionalists demanded preservation. Modernizers demanded transparency. And somewhere in the middle stood King Charles, described by observers as a monarch carrying impossible pressure while balancing family strain against institutional survival. Because royal history has never truly been about who wins public battles. It has always been about who carries continuity through uncertainty. That was the darker truth slowly settling beneath the noise. Headlines come and go. Rumors explode and disappear. Public outrage shifts every week, but institutions measure time differently. And according to the growing interpretation surrounding this entire situation, the palace was allegedly thinking far beyond headlines, far beyond social media, far beyond one scandal. Observers increasingly believe the real question behind closed doors was not whether one rumor was true, but what kind of monarchy survives after the storm passes. And maybe that is why this story became so emotionally powerful. People were never just reacting to gossip. They were projecting fears about identity, stability, tradition, and control onto one of the world's oldest institutions. That is why every silence felt loaded, every pause felt deliberate, every carefully neutral appearance started looking like hidden strategy. And as attention slowly began moving elsewhere, one uncomfortable question remained hanging over the entire monarchy like a shadow nobody inside the palace could fully escape. If private decisions had already quietly begun behind closed doors, would the public even recognize the moment everything changed? Or would history only understand it years later after the silence finally revealed what the palace never intended to say out loud?